Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Will Moyer. I'm one of the course directors of the NINDS Clinical Trials Methodology course, which is graciously supported by NINDS under the grant numbers listed at the bottom there. First, I want to just give you all the course directors for this version of the Clinical Trials Methodology course. I'm on the bottom right. I'm Will Moyer at the University of Michigan. Also, we have Dr. Christopher Coffey, who is at the University of Iowa, Dr. Robin Conway at NINDS, Dr. Lori Gutman at the University of Iowa, and Roger Lewis at Harbor UCLA in the Department of Emergency Medicine. So the focus of our talk today is to give some high-yield tips about what the purpose of the Clinical Trials Methodology course is and what you will work on in it if you are accepted into it, and also give pointers for applications and improving your chances of having a successful application. So our major aims of our course are to identify promising investigators in the clinical neurosciences and provide them with a rigorous foundation in the design of patient-oriented clinical research, specifically and usually clinical trials. We are also very interested in promoting ongoing professional career development and keeping these young scientists involved in doing clinical trials so we can move the field forward. And finally, our other major aim is to help with the scientifically sound design of early phase research in the neurosciences to help create a pipeline of academically and publicly funded research that will lead to future trials that will help us learn how to treat high impact neurologic diseases better tomorrow than we are doing today. So what is the intention of our course? It is to address a key gap. It is, even though oftentimes some of the smallest amount of resources are put into early phase trials, they are some of the hardest to design and implement, but answering crucially important questions about feasibility, operations, and proof of concept and biological promise. The expertise across the country in planning trials is not evenly distributed. Some investigators at centers that have a lot of resources and experience and perhaps run data centers or clinical coordinating centers have potential access to more clinicians and biostatisticians who've designed clinical trials. And the goal of the course is to try to democratize that expertise somewhat so that we can get proposals from people who are engaging in neuroscience research and trials from across the country and to a certain extent across the world. And that we want to help create these early trials that will lead to scientifically interesting results that inform the future scientific steps. This course is rigorous and requires a substantial time commitment, a commitment that past trainees in the course have felt is worth it. But some key things to think about if you're considering this course. This is more than simply a grant writing course or even a sort of protocol design workshop. In it, we are working over the course of really 6 months, 6 to 8 months to develop a scientific protocol, refine a question, and potentially develop a grant application unless you have a specific set of funds to engage in the trials locally. But one of the key things as to whether this course is a good fit for you is you should be the scientific leader of the project. Broadly, sort of putting that to specifics, you would be submitting the IRB application as the principal investigator. You would be the first author of the publication to come from the study that you are working to design. You should be at a stage in your career that you are ready to conduct a trial that you are proposing. for our course, and we have extensive instructions in our application. And one of the other things that is important to us is that you should have the tools, including a local mentor to support you, to design, improve, and implement the study you propose. And by mentor, someone who is a scientific partner to help you be the leader of the project that you are developing. The general structure of the course, this is a blended experience. We have project-based small groups. You're organized into small groups that are led by usually 1 to 2 clinicians and a biostatistician. And you meet by video teleconference in the spring and fall. The clinicians and biostatisticians will have expertise in neuroscience. They may not have specific expertise in your subspecialty, and that is not a bug. That is a feature of our course, in that in any sort of panel, grant review panel, your grants would be reviewed by a mixture of people who may be subspecialists in your field and maybe experts in other neurologic trials and other neurosciences. In the spring, before our in-person course, you meet by video teleconference and go through a series of tasks to help develop your protocol and the scientific questions you're asking. We also have large group public webinars that are open freely to anyone in the world who is interested, where we discuss clinical trial design topic, and we archive those and post those to the internet to be reviewed later on video. We hold some office hours to sort of discuss the ongoing development of your projects and try to get input from other members of our faculty who might not be your small group leaders. And then we have a 3-day residential course, which is a key portion of this and will allow you to move your project further and have access to some of the real thought leaders in clinical trials in the neurosciences, and that's this year occurring in July 20 to 22nd in Ann Arbor. Both the pre-work in the small groups and the residential course are required. You know you're not going to be able to make the residential course happen and be able to be there, then this wouldn't be a good year to apply. We would hope that you would consider it in the future when you're sure that this could meet your scheduling needs. After the residential course, you shift, after having refined your protocol, to developing a grant proposal, unless, of course, perhaps we've had some trainees who've been from NIH intramural and have protocol funds and don't have to submit for external funding. But after the residential course, for most of you, you will be working to develop a grant application, and we put that through a mock review panel that usually occurs at the beginning of November. This has been a really rewarding experience, an eye-opening experience. And this past year, we have had our trainees act as reviewers on the review panel to get an inside look as to how a study section works. The history of our course in the era of the mid-2000s, 2005 through approximately 2012, we had a clinical trials methods course that was very well regarded, run through a contract to the University of Rochester and held in Vail, patterned after a oncology protocol development course that is still going on. The course morphed and became a competitively bid grant under an R25 mechanism in 2014 or 2013. Our 5th cohort was in 2018. During the R25, we had approximately 30 to 40 trainees each year. We have changed our model somewhat, and we are a bit smaller, although we do have a higher faculty to trainee ratio and focus on about 20 trainees per year. We had a biomarker track that was separate in 2020. If you have colleagues who've recommended the course, we're working to integrate that in with our sort of usual track small groups this year, so that all of the trainees may be exposed to some projects that involve biomarkers if they are in their groups. So again, the level of commitment, the small groups are going to meet approximately every 2 weeks before the in-person course. There will be work that you're expected to complete beforehand in order to get progress on your clinical trial. A lot of focus is on getting the questions right in terms of what the scientific questions you are working to answer. And then we hope that you get through those. People can make progress at different paces and sometimes have to come up with alternative ideas, but we are flexible to that if it's necessary. We have the webinars that help complement the assignments. And then we hope that you have a draft protocol ready and in hand when you come to the in-person course that you can refine that. As I mentioned before, the attendance of the in-person course is mandatory, and then meetings in the fall to develop the grant applications. And we really have this expectation that the course is going to shape and change your idea. You may have a great idea, but usually we can do some things that are going to cause some pivots that are going to make it even better. So having your local mentor engaged and be willing to be flexible about the idea and receive feedback is key. This is a measurement. These are some measurements that we have from some of our first cohorts in terms of what happens after the course in those years. The idea here is how many of the projects that were proposed in the course actually were done. And within 3 years, we see that over 30% got to enrolling their first patients. Over half had a protocol submitted, and well over 25% had a proposal funded by that point in time. This is not meant to scare you. This is meant to look at just the fact that doing clinical research is a bit of a long game, and we do feel we are able to accelerate your career and help you get these ideas going forward with the design help we give during the course. And many of the trainees have received external funding from NIH. This is some of the types of mechanisms they've had from those first few cohorts, and we're continuing to follow the subsequent cohorts, and as that data matures, we'll have more information on that. So in terms of the application, I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the parts of the application. First, there is a basic statement of the scientific area and key information, kind of telling us why it is important to be studying the area. It is also crucial to think about the NINDS transparency and reporting guidelines and rigor guidelines when drafting this section to ensure that there's the proper preclinical or prior clinical work, or if it's a behavioral intervention, the proper theory-based work that supports evaluating the therapy that you're proposing at this stage. Next, we have you summarize your research question. We have a set of bullet points that help us quickly look at your project and understand what you might be doing. We do understand that you are at a point where you may not be completely sure what the project is you want to do, but part of this exercise is to define what you think the study should look like now, and then we can help you shape that in the course if you're selected. We'd like you to list potential funding sources. An important part of this exercise is also to consider looking at NIH Project Reporter and clinicaltrials.gov to ensure that your idea isn't already funded or published or an ongoing trial. And if it is, whether you need to think about doing something that could complement that information, but that will still be relevant, knowing that somebody else may already be doing a similar project. We have you list the members of your team, provide your biosketch and your mentor biosketches. The personal statement for the biosketch should address your motivation for taking the course, and then your mentor biosketch should talk about how they are going to mentor you. There should be a letter from your chair, potentially, or division chief, talking about your experience and also about the availability of some time that is protected for you in the 2 years after the course so that you could potentially accomplish the study that you're proposing. Finally, if you are looking to use an investigational compound, that is not something that is available, as a sort of, prescribable or administratable drug, you should be sure that from the company that you've reached out to the company and that they would be willing to provide this sort of compound for the type of study that you're designing. This takes some time, but it's just one thing that oftentimes people have great ideas about investigational agents that perhaps could be moved into another indication. But if those drugs aren't currently commercially available, there needs to be buy-in from the owner of that compound in order to actually potentially have access to it for a research study. Couple other changes that are in the instructions. We are considering team applications for 2020. Particularly, we think teams that might involve, a clinician and a biostatistician could be who is interested in, both who are interested in gaining new skills in clinical trial design in neurology, could be particularly interesting and could enrich both of them. Other possible combinations could be clinicians and engineers. For example, if it's a form of device or a clinician who's focused on the clinical aspect and perhaps a scientist who's focused on molecules or biomarkers. If you have applied before and received critiques, you will get an extra page in the application to address the prior critiques. And certainly we try to answer your questions and reach out to you if you have questions about why your prior application may not have been chosen. I will say that the course has had a lot of interest, and we, at this point in time, don't have as many spots as there are qualified applicants. So we do try our best not to turn people down twice. We hope that you can consider reapplying in the event we aren't able to accommodate you the year that you apply. At this point in time, I just wanted to take a breath, and Joy, had any questions popped into the chat box?
No.
Okay, and I guess I didn't really show that to everybody, but in your Blue Jeans room, as long as you're not on the phone, there is a chat function that allows you to type in questions, and I think you can also at this point unmute yourself using *4 if there are any questions. But before we do questions, just wanted to talk about a few of the key pitfalls in applications. I'll cover these bullets, and then I'll just go around to Drs. Conwitz, Gutman, and Coffey for their additional thoughts. But after having done this for a few years, some of the key things that we have seen that are associated with a lower likelihood of acceptance in the course is not proposing a clinical trial. So this is a clinical trials methodology course, not just a general clinical research course. At your stage with your disease, it may be that a good prospective cohort study is what is really needed, but that's not the strength and the orientation of our course. We do typically look a bit askance at people who are proposing phase 3 studies for this course. In most settings, there are other venues for that, and we're looking for people who are designing the earlier phase studies that provide the justification for doing a phase 3 study. Sometimes people will propose studies that look like a phase 3 study but are simply underpowered. That, again, we're working to give you alternatives to that in this course, but we do want you to think sort of critically about different endpoints and different bars for proof of concept or feasibility or tolerability that would be answering important questions in the earlier space. Some applications don't have a real clear question or study. There may be a lot of clinical or biological background, but it's unclear what the next step you're proposing is. Again, lacking preclinical data or rigor. A sole emphasis on safety can be problematic in that you may receive advice that you first have to do a study that shows safety. One of the issues with that is if you don't have some additional quantitative evaluation of feasibility, proof of concept, or effect, most safety problems happen fairly rarely. So if you're proposing a smaller early phase trial, it's hard to learn much about safety unless there is a really, really high rate of adverse events. Applications that don't clearly sort of paint a picture of what one would do with the results of the study also tend to be less highly looked at. We did note that if we know a study is already started or being conducted already, that can be a problematic. And one red flag for us, and this is not absolutely untenable, but it requires some cooperation across both of the institutions, is somebody who's changing institutions in the middle of 2020. We've found that we've had some trainees who've been in that position before, and there is so much going on with your life. Sometimes you're moving cities, you're definitely starting up at a new institution and learning a new system, that it may be hard to focus on the course if that is something that is in your plans for 2020. So again, you are certainly welcome to apply, but that does raise some red flags for us just because we know that professionals in this phase of their careers have a lot going on when they start out at a new institution. I think with that, I guess I would first hand it over to the other course directors. Dr. Coffey, is there anything you want to add in terms of pitfalls or other things?
Sorry, I was muted. I don't have anything.
Dr. Gutman?
Will, I think you covered it very well. I would just encourage people to apply, even though we do have, there are a limited number of applications. I will say that each year that we've had this course, the applications have gotten better and better. So that makes the competition a little bit tighter. So the more clearly you can follow the recommended instructions, the better chance you have of being understood whether you'd fit well into the course or not. Participation is key. I think we've gotten positive feedback from almost everyone who's participated in the course over the years, and continue to maintain contact with them, which is another positive aspect of the course.
Dr. Conway?
Just to follow up with what Lori stated, is we have a reunion at the American Academy of Neurology meeting every spring. And we also have an external advisory board that gives us input. And then, of course, NIH and NINDS is very involved in giving revision and input. So the course, it's well vetted, it's a fun course, but it takes more time and effort than a lot of people realize. So just want to state that up front.
And we also do receive support from the American Academy of Neurology. They do generously support our CME efforts, along with our dinners at the course and the reunion each year. And we are quite grateful for that support. But it's you can get a lot out of this and move your idea forward quite a bit, but you have to be ready, and you have to have some time blocked out so that you can keep making progress and be open to the feedback and the scientific input. So in terms of the nuts and bolts, the applications are due on the 28th of February. I know it's a leap year, but we didn't give an extra day. This gives us an extra day to review your applications that we can enjoy this year. There may be some additional information that we'll request from you. I think you cover actually most of it in the application. We are working hard to make our initial decisions by March 15th. And then there will be a small group match. We will have set up our small groups and matched our faculty and the times that they are available. You will get to see a list of the faculty and their expertise, and you will need to rank which of the groups you would be willing and able to be in. If you aren't able to make a match with any of our times this year, then we would likely just need to defer your participation to a following year. We anticipate we will have 6 or 7 small groups, and they will be meeting across a wide variety of times on different days. But the small group experience is essential, so you'll get to see all the ones that you could potentially do after we give initial offers into the course. We do anticipate we'll have a wait list, so if people aren't able to match to one of the times, we think we will work on filling in those blanks off of the wait list. We're going to work to start the small groups hopefully in April, even before the AAN meeting, which is in late April this year. But depending on the group's broad availability, some of the groups start at different times. And just for those of you who end up being in the course, that means some groups may be doing the third item on their list before some other groups are doing the first, just depending on when groups get started and how where they're going. But the goal is that you're going to be going through about 6 or 7 of the sessions before the July in-person meeting. The in-person course is generally in Ann Arbor, the even years, this being one of those, and in Iowa City in the odd years, at least numerically. This is just the sort of overall description of the course. We have the protocol development, although these are actually reverse. Proposal development really is more in the August-November period, whereas protocol development is what we work on first. The distinction being the protocol is really the scientific document that could allow someone to do a reproducible scientific inquiry. So at this point, our website here is at neurotrials.training. Here is our group picture from the last time we were in Ann Arbor. And at this point in time, we will open up to questions. And if you want, you can either type them into the chat box, or if you want to unmute at *4. Hopefully all of them. And oh, the other thing that I forgot to mention, if you have inquiries about your project or your idea, you are well encouraged to send questions to us in advance to the email that's in the application instructions that goes to Joy and I. I will use this belated time to recognize Joy Black. She's the Director of Education at the Siren Network Clinical Coordinating Center, and she is truly the glue that keeps the clinical trials methodology course together. So she will be interacting with you in the application process, and if you have questions, she will make sure that we answer them for you. The thing that typically helps us the most in terms of thinking about your idea is if you think about in the instructions the sort of bullet points of what's the condition, what's the phenotype, what's the real idea of what you might be studying in what phase. That helps get us oriented towards that, although we will work to try to answer any questions. We have frequently asked questions on the left side of our website near the application space, and we try to update those when we hear people. Every year people come up with new and good questions, and don't be afraid to ask any questions. They won't be, we don't weigh those questions in our weighing of your applications. And generally, I think interacting with us early can only help. Yeah, and I think thank you, Dr. Kim, on that question. Does that include getting feedback from you on all drafts of the application? With respect, we know that you're busy, and you know that we're busy too. The earlier that a draft of your application could come our way for us to look at and give you feedback on, the greater the likelihood we could give you some meaningful feedback on it. Our executive team meets on Mondays. And if there are overall questions, sometimes I will answer those. Sometimes I will share them with the rest of the EC, and we'll discuss those and try to get back to you. So the earlier that you get us a potential, some parts of an application, the better feedback we could provide you. And again, if you, and yes, we would definitely look at a draft of the application in advance and give you a sense as to what might help it, what might strengthen it. In the end, though, it's always a little bit of a unknown. Many applications come in close to the end, and while we wish we could say we can guarantee like this is definitely going to be an acceptable application, year after year the applications do get better and better. So we will do our best to help you improve it, but it is also possible a bunch of phenomenal ones are going to be coming in close to the end. So right now, we do have, we've been doing this for a while, and we do have, we do have internally the potential possibility of some early acceptances. Oftentimes, and that would involve the full formal application through the application portal with all the information. So if you do apply early, there are sometimes cases where there are extremely meritorious applications that we could make a preliminary decision on. That helps us, and that means we don't have to look through as many sort of right at the crunch time. Typically, when we receive an application early enough for us to look at early, we put it into sort of two major categories. One where we may be able to provisionally accept, and two where we really need to see the rest of the applications because we think it could be close. Or three, if we think there are substantial things that you need to revise, then we would send it back to you with some suggestions as to how to correct some things. So this is a really good question, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Dr. Schutz. The need for protected time. So yes, some degree of time that your chair or division chief is supportive of you being able to make it to the small group meetings and make it to the clinical trials residential course. In terms of your time going forward, it may depend on what your startup package looks like, what's sort of expected, how many days of research you may have to accomplish things, how much time you have before you have to get funded through a K. Part of our assessment here is simply to ensure that you are in a spot where you're going to be able to succeed. There's a variety of academic settings, in emergency medicine and neurology that I'm most familiar with, some of which are very sort of brutal in that you have a very brutal clinical load and you're kind of supposed to get your research done on nights and weekends. And that, I'm sorry if you're in that position, but the part of this is to get a sense that isn't where you are for afterwards, because we think that it's just hard to have work-life balance if getting research as part of your career has to be something you're fitting into a completely full clinical workload. So some of it is to get a sense as to what your position looks like, what sort of other force multipliers you may have in terms of access to research coordinators and others. There is no specific amount that is required for the course, but it's generally ensuring that your chair has an understanding of what that you will have assignments during this year. You will have this trip to Ann Arbor in July. July is often a busy time clinically with so many transitions. and then continued work on some of the small groups afterwards. And while the webinars could be looked at, asynchronously, the small groups really require in-person engagement and participation. So if you're going to have a ton of conflicts with the small groups, then that tends to be a problem. So that's a pretty long-winded way of putting it, but hopefully that's responsive. So there doesn't need to be a specific, my so-and-so has 20% protected time for 3 years in order to get research funding. Things like that are potentially looked at favorably because then we see that you're in an environment where we think you can succeed. And we're definitely out there to try to help you succeed in any way possible. Dr. Lewis, one of our course directors who wasn't able to be on today, he is a chair in emergency medicine, so he is very interested in this part of the application because he is very interested in his faculty development and knows, what could be going there. Dr. Conway, did you want to add something? Okay, sorry. Any other questions?
Hey, Will, this is Lori. I'm just going to say that, that's the chair's letter really, and your mentor's letter really is what helps us understand that they understand what you're committing to and what you're going to be doing afterwards. Is that fair?
Yeah, and again, and like we said before, we are interested in having trainees from places that maybe haven't done as much clinical research. So if your chair is less familiar with clinical research and how this could go, we could certainly work to link them with peers. Dr. Gutman is vice chair of research at Iowa. But if they have questions, we could certainly help. And Karen Johnston at Virginia, who's elevated within that institution, but had been one of our early course directors, we could certainly help them develop sort of peer-to-peer questions and give them contacts even outside of our course directors if they had questions about what it is to be in this course, if your department is really more of a basic science focus and hasn't had a lot of early career clinical research, clinical trialists. Right. All right. Are there any other questions right now? Well, I think at this point in time, we are prepared to adjourn. We will put a recording of this up, and you can watch it at double speed if you have any other questions, but certainly don't hesitate to email us. We are here to try to promote your success. We find it so rewarding to work with people in the kind of early phase of their careers in clinical trials, and that could be people in the early phase of their careers or people who've maybe done basic science research before and are now coming to design clinical trials for the first time. So there's no age or rank limit, but we really are looking for people who haven't led clinical trials before. Maybe you were a site PI on a multi-center study, but really we were helping you design your kind of first trials that are going to help move your career forward. So with that, we will adjourn, and I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing more from you.